Good afternoon, everyone. It is November the 3rd, 2025. I'm not going to put up a video today. I'm going to talk. I want to do a bit of an update as well and say some more on that horrific anniversary from my previous video, because I did miss some details in it that I thought were very important. And of course, when I do the videos, that's why when I do a story and I have information, I'll put the video up and where I've got the information from, so that people can verify and understand where that information came from and they can see it for themselves. And it didn't quite work out that way, because I've seen a lot of people, I've noticed my channel, that a lot of people enjoy my talking, which is great. But sometimes it's always good to check the video out too, because sometimes I do miss some very important details, and I know I wasn't feeling 100% up to par that morning when I put up the video. With my diabetes, I hadn't noticed that my sugar levels had dropped, so I wasn't firing completely on all cylinders that morning for all of some details. But there was some very important details that I wanted to mention, and one of them was that on the school shooting, before he even went in, the shooter went in to do the school shooting, there was another incident at his home, as I understand. He managed to lure a 17-year-old girl named Kim, and that was, when you look at the previous video from this video, you'll see the girl's picture, very lovely looking girl. He lured her into his home. He sexually assaulted her, apparently, I believe, in the basement, and then killed her, and then went to the school on the shooting rampage at the time. So there was that part of it that I missed, which was very important as well. Nobody knows what transpired, what happened to make him go into the school and start shooting. And then, of course, one of the survivors there, the teacher that survived that, he was talking about knowing the student as well. Previously, had not in touch with him for a while, didn't know what happened for a couple of years when he lost touch with him and why he would do such a thing. And then there was another student also killed, and he died a month later after being shot. Everyone else survived, but it was the horror of that day and the trauma of that day that people had to live through. So I just wanted to bring that up. And the other thing is that I wasn't aware of in the 6 months before, the teacher also mentioned in that video, don't mind me, I'm just reading some notes here too, so I don't forget everything. Something that previously had happened about 6 months before in Toronto, and I wasn't aware of that. That was 1975 was quite a turmoil year for me. I separated from my first husband, a police officer. I got myself a job as a security guard, and then as a security guard, that's where I met my second husband, who was a security guard at that time, and we just started going out, and then we did eventually get married, but of course I had to get divorced first from my first husband so I could marry my second husband. So my life was in kind of turmoil at the same time, but it really shook a lot of people up, and this was something that we had not expected, and this was something that we didn't see again until probably in the around 1989, I believe it was, in I can't pronounce this, it's a French name, Polytech. And this was a college where 8 college girls were killed. And this was again in Montreal, and someone came in and killed the students there. So these are prior to the Columbine, was in the 1990s. And people sort of refer more to like the Columbine shooting down in the States as like being the first. It wasn't actually the first, but it's your questions, are these actually copycat killings from prior years before that they're seeing and that. So it puts a lot of questions as why are people just flipping out, and these students and these young people flipping out and going in and terrorizing schools. And today, as I said, we have we have lockdowns in the schools today to try and make sure that we try and save as many children as possible. And it's more like we don't necessarily have shootings in our school. We've had incidences even in the last few years of knives being brought to school, but fortunately it's been caught early and on time, and that's where we've had the debate on the community officer, police officers being in the schools or not in the schools, and then they were going on racism with the community officers, so then they pulled them out of the schools for a while now. I think they're thinking of putting them back in the schools again. So there's a big debate over that as well, and we shouldn't have to go to that scenario, but I do believe that with the police, with better education and training is necessary in dealing with, certainly with teenagers and type of things. If they're going into schools, they need to know how to deal properly with children. They need to have the psychologists and the people that need to support the police officers as well there to be on hand as well to support different situations. I think that would work. That's would work much better, because this is what they're doing too. The mental health workers are now trying to get in as well to help side by side with our police officers. I think that's a much better way of looking at that situation. And I wanted to go on about the effects of the childhood trauma, and certainly the survivor who's talking on my previous video there, the teacher, it's as clear to him today as it was back then, and what trauma actually does to these survivors, and especially the children. It's hard enough on an adult having trauma and having to survive it, but I'm going to, when I mentioned in my video here that I was a security guard previously, I wanted to mention an incident. This was maybe 2 or 3 years after the shooting occurred, and I was working as a security guard, and I was working on the mall, and I had met this little boy. He was about 5 years old, little Johnny, really cute little guy, but his mother had some mental issues and that, and she was trying to raise this little guy. And he was like a little pest kind of, but he used to hang around the mall because he lived right across the street from the mall. So here I am, and he and I got quite friendly together, and he really got to really like me, and I got to like him, and we got to know each other. So I kind of depended sometimes on him as well for things. Well, this is a traumatic situation that happened in regards to little Johnny here. Was this particular weekend, I was supposed to have been on the mall working, and my company, because I was good handling money at that time, transferred me that week up to the CARP fair, which is just a small town, and a small town fair, to put me at the front gate so I could handle the tickets and money coming in, which I was very good at. So I got transferred that weekend. This incident I'm going to talk about happened. And so I'm doing the tickets. I'm at the front gates, and the CARP fire department came in, and they were talking about this horrific fire that had happened at a mall here in Ottawa. And of course, immediately I perked up and started asking questions and said, well, what mall? And it turned out it was a mall that I worked at, that I should have been there that weekend. And this is how I first heard the story, was that there was 3 children left in a car by themselves, no supervision whatsoever, had managed to, I guess, get hold of some matches, set the car on fire, and then somehow managed to get the car going forward and drove it into the mall and set the mall on fire, which was not the full true story. I did not find out until I got back, but I was just all I wanted to do was get back to Ottawa as soon as possible to find out what was going on and what actually happened, because I needed to talk to my other partner, because there was 2 of us on the mall. Like, we each changed sides, but we each patrolled half the mall, and then we switched each end. So when I got back, I found out more details about it and what had actually happened. My partner was he didn't know anything about it at the time. It was a new guard that didn't even know where the fire extinguishers were on the mall. He had no training for the mall like I did. And he didn't even inform the other guard that there was a situation outside. And from what I understand, afterwards, was the 3 kids in the car. They didn't smash into the mall. They didn't start the mall on fire. They got a hold of matches in the car. They set the car on fire. The 2 older children managed to get out of the car, but they left their younger sibling in the back seat of the car, in the car seat. Just a baby, only not very old, I know that much. And so by the time the fire department got there, the car was pretty well fully engulfed. People were standing around. They couldn't get to the child in the car. Fire department finally got in, and what I understand. And the tragic about this thing was that little Johnny was there that day. I wasn't there to even talk to him or even try and comfort him in any way. And being small at 5 years old, he of course darted in amongst the adults, and he got in to see this close up. And what he saw was this little baby. And I also knew it was when the paper came out describing all this. I also knew the head detective as well that was the head of the case on this particular time, and I realized what had happened, and to the extent that our first responders had to go emotionally and mentally through as well, because the little baby was so badly burnt that the arms and legs were literally burnt off the baby. And the baby, of course, died. And little Johnny, at 5 years old, had seen this terrible thing happen. And he went home. He couldn't sleep at night. He was having terrible, terrible nightmares, his mother said. So I said, well, I'll take him for the weekend. I brought him home with me. And I put him in our spare bedroom. I put him in the spare bedroom. He was having nightmares. And I would lie down beside him. I would comfort him and do the best I could. And then the best thing I found was to get him to sleep at night was, at that time I had a male standard poodle. And I used to put the dog in bed with him, which he just used to hang on and cuddle the dog through the whole night. And he would have a much better chance of sleeping at night was with the dog. And this is one of the reasons why I have a service dog today for myself, as well as the importance of these animals. These dogs are just incredible what they can do. They don't judge people. They're there to support and help in any way they can. And of course, his mother couldn't handle a situation. She didn't know what to do. And back then, of course, we didn't have people and medical people for trauma experts on how to deal with all this stuff. Our first responders, you go home and you just have to lump it and swallow it and take it in and be what they considered a man at the time, because we had more male officers at that time. It was an all-male police department, and we didn't have the situation, as he mentioned, the teacher mentioned too. There was no cell phones back then. And what got me was a couple of years later, I got talking to some other party who was living across the street in a high-rise, and looked out the window and saw the car on fire in the parking lot. And I said, well, why didn't you call the fire department? Oh, he said, well, I figured somebody else would do it. Well, with no cell phones like we have today, it would have been, I think they would have appreciated, the fire department would have appreciated 100 calls coming in on the same call to say that, yes, this is happening. And today, this is where we're so grateful for having 911 and realizing where the situation is and what needs to be sent. Do we need the fire, the police, or the ambulance, or do we need everybody? It's the dispatcher is terrific in that way. And when you see, and I'm glad when they come out with some of the 911 calls, and you actually hear how the operators are just fantastic when they deal with children who are having to go through something in trauma. And they're the first ones that can touch and reach that child. So they're the first ones that are on the front line. And what I've seen is fantastic, the way they keep the child calm until we can get our first responders to them to help in the situation. But again, the other thing that we found out about this little baby that died was that this little child turned out to be little Johnny's one of his cousins from Vars, Ontario. That's where they were from. Another small town. They'd come in to do the shopping in the big city here, which wasn't that big at that time, but the big city of Ottawa. And he died. So he had this in his memory. And then they became friends. I became friends with his mother. They chummed with Kate. They came back and forth. Sometimes Johnny would spend weekends with me and that. And then they helped us move when we moved from our place, when my second husband and I moved. And by that time, I believe I had my first child. Yes, I did. I had my first child, and I was pregnant with my second child in the early 80s by that time. And then we lost touch of Johnny. And it was interesting because a number of years later, I'm standing at the bus stop. This young man, he looked like he was in his early 20s, and he comes up and he's standing beside me, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and thinking, he's familiar in some way. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, and all I said was, Johnny? And he looked at me, and then he said Chris, because he had known me by Chris. And he described that incident to me as when he was 5 years old. It was exactly the same way he described it when he was 5 years old. That's how much it affected him. He's now a young man at 21 years old, remembering what happened. Frame by frame, basically, the way he described it to me. And the other unfortunate thing was that with Johnny was that I felt so guilty not being there that weekend. And when he was 5, the other thing he told me was, he said to me when I got back on the mall working after the incident, he said, "Chris, if you'd been there, you would have saved him, just like you saved that other man." And I'm looking at him and I'm realizing what he's saying, and that put me a bit on a guilt trip at the same time. And what Johnny was talking about was a time that I was working on the Santa Claus display, which I've talked about before, where one of our plump guards would play Santa Claus. And I was helping like the little elf kind of thing, even though I was in full uniform and bringing the toddlers up to the children at the time. And I happened to look out on the parking lot and saw this man flipping around on the ground, realizing that the man is taking a seizure. And I ran out, and of course I helped him with a seizure, because having a boyfriend, as I explained in an even previous video, I knew what to do with a seizure. So I knew how to help this man. And a couple of days later, after the seizure, this man showed up and asked if I was the one that actually turned around and was the one that gave him the first aid. In other words, to help him. And he explained that the doctor said if I hadn't known what to do, he might have been dead. Now, this is something that Johnny had seen me rush out the door in a hurry, and he saw what I did for this man. So you get a 5-year-old child trying to put 2 and 2 together, and then, you know, you hear the other first responders doing the same thing that I'm doing, and I'm feeling guilty. Like, would it have made the difference? That was the big question. Would my being there that day actually made the difference? Would I have been looking out at the parking lot? Maybe, because I just did glance out at the parking lot from time to time. It wasn't exactly where I was supposed to be patrolling, but I always kept an eye on everything. That's why I always talk about be aware of your surroundings, which I always try to be, even at work. This is where I learned it was important to be aware of your surroundings, was to an incident like that, where I was able to save a man from a seizure. So, you know, this is one of the things that I've seen with first responders. Well, could we have done this, or could we have done that, or maybe this could have been done better, maybe that could have been done better, and maybe would it have made the difference? I mean, I still ask that question to this day. Maybe if I had been there, would I have seen it? Because I knew where the fire extinguishers were. The Loblaws right there. If they couldn't break in the back window, I would have grabbed the butcher, told him to grab the knife cleavers if necessary. We'll do anything to break into the window. So even to this day, I wonder, you know, and it put me a bit on a guilt trip. And I know how hard it is for our first responders, having to respond to trauma, trying to deal with it themselves. And I still, in my own way, have to deal with this. And this is like nearly 50 years later as well that this incident happened. But it's, to me, just like that teacher, it's as clear as what it was back then. And to run into Johnny at 21 years old and him describing it to me exactly the way he described it to me as a 5-year-old child, that was kind of shocking. So this is what, I don't want to bring it too long. I know this is a long video, but I thought it was very important that we have this conversation today so that people understand what are we doing? What are we thinking? We really need to stop and think about how we need to go forward in the future and how we need to do things differently in a good way. So I'm going to leave it there, everyone, today. Take care, watch your surroundings, be safe, and we'll talk again soon. And bye-bye.